So it is my pleasure to be here. It's been an awe-inspiring 2 days. I'm humbled that I became a leader to learn from in 2017, and I'm humbled that I'm able to speak with you today about these topics that bring me passion and purpose. As mentioned, I left the relatively safe world of demolition into the dangerous world of teaching. And that joke was funny years ago, but it's even more funny now because teachers are being attacked at all levels, including the highest levels of the government. So I transitioned to becoming an English teacher, which was a smooth transition for me. I had always been interested in literature, writing, and history and drama. And I noticed early on that schools did not reflect the real lives of students. The lives of students outside of school were remarkably different than the lives inside of school. And I focused instruction in my classroom to address that. Later on, our district created our Scholar Plus Teaching and Learning Initiative to sort of tackle the same problem, that our students' lives inside of school was different than the lives outside of school and what they were going to inherit. And our Scholar Plus Teaching and Learning program, which if you go to my breakout session, I will discuss more detail about the nuts and bolts and the machinations of how that works. I won't do that here, but if you go to that, we can go into more detail and I'll answer questions there. So the linchpin of Scholar Plus Teaching and Learning Initiative, that it was not a tech initiative. We did not want to separate technology away from teaching and learning. It needed to be an integral part of it, and we created these desired outcomes first. And part of the desired outcomes were something that was a big topic today, and that was equity in education. So we knew that technology could provide equitable learning outcomes for all students, especially those that were previously underserved. And that's how Scholar Plus was born. So like I said, while I was an English teacher, I noticed that there was a disparity on what students were doing in the classroom and how the real life was going on, and the same thing with technology and the same thing with literature. And so what we've done in our district is that we've noticed that students need to have opportunities to build a level of proficiency across all media platforms. That includes social media, that includes media literacy, that includes being able to communicate in programming languages. And I'll give you some examples about what that is. A couple years ago, you guys remember when clowns were a thing? And everybody was afraid of clowns? Well, there was this middle school student who stopped me, and she was extremely scared, and she said, "Mr. Williams, a white van," it's always a white van pulled up in front of a school up the street and abducted 3 kids. And we're scared for our lives. Talking to her, calming her down, we figured out where she got that news from was on Twitter. Of course we know Twitter is the best place to get the news, and nobody, even in the highest levels of government, are going to lie to you on Twitter. So we took that work and we decided to do some real good digital citizenship lessons on where you should get your news, how you should get your news vetted, and worked with students using platforms to help them work on that. That was one example, and that's students as being a consumer of media. Another example that we noticed, in 2008 when I was a classroom teacher, somebody challenged me, a mentor challenged me to apply to be a Google certified teacher. And I had no idea what that was. And the requirements for that program were that I had to create a 60-second video clip of what we do in my class. So I came back to my class and I was teaching struggling readers and writers, reading intervention students who had not been successful in school and had not been successful in English language arts, and I gave them that project. So this project is yours. You are going to create the 60-second video of what we do in our classroom using technology for literacy, right? I gave them design parameters, and mind you, these were the lowest reading students on a high school campus. They came back with an extremely compelling video, and in fact, when I was up at Google in Mountain View, they commented that that was an extremely compelling video, and more so because I wasn't even in the video. The students intentionally kept me out of the video. These students used the tools that we had available to create a compelling story, to communicate a compelling story of what they did in the classroom. I found out later that one of the students who was in most need of reading intervention This student who we tapped to do this project, she had a YouTube channel. And she had thousands of followers in 2008 and millions of views on her videos. Now, her videos had to do with Jonas Brothers and unicorns and a bunch of other things, but she communicated this to her audience. And that made me think. That made me think about students being, instead of just being passive receptors, being producers, being able to produce media, be able to be communicative across platforms. Another example of how students need to be communicative across platforms would have to do with what was mentioned, invention literacy. You know, a lot of people like to joke about the younger generation, millennials ruin this, avocado toast that, and they like to make those jokes. But I want you to know I have complete faith in the younger generations because they're going to be the ones that are going to have to solve the problems that we created. They're going to have to solve those problems. And what tools are they going to use to solve those problems? And what platforms are they going to use to communicate the solution to those problems? Here's an example in our school district. We do this program with our adult special ed students, and we have a scholar bar, like an Apple bar, like a Genius bar, and these students repair Chromebooks, and they do other things. Well, we had trouble with some of the things that the students were doing, and they needed some templates. They needed some ideas on how to remedy that. So we took this problem to one of our other high schools, and we put our students through a design thinking process to help solve this problem. And what these students did is they created this plexiglass template that sits over the Chromebook and clearly identifies every screw for these adult special ed students to remove, and with directions on how to tighten and how to take care of these things. These students in the high school were able to take a real world problem, were able to iterate, we're able to use design thinking, we're able to keep journals, they are invention literate, and we're able to solve a real world problem. That's one example of how students can be able to, that they're going to be at an advantage, are students that can be communicative across platforms, including media literacy, including invention literacy, including some level of coding. You don't need to be a programming master, but some level of coding. That's just one example. I can tell you that it's been a great learning curve for me to be able to work with these students, to be able to get them what they need, and they inspire me every day. And like I said, these students that we have today, they're going to have to solve the problems that we created. And we need to make sure that we train them using the platforms and platforms that have not been invented, and use the tools available to them to communicate their solutions. Things like school shootings, things like climate change, go on and on and on. Our students are going to have to solve those problems, and we need to make sure that they're literate in the platforms of today. Thank you.